Hello everyone, this is Shadow. Due to copyright restrictions on YouTube, I can't publish many of the audiobooks you love. That's why I've created a special paid service where you can enjoy over 300 high-quality audiobooks from platforms like Webnovel, Pocket FM, Audible, Wuxia, and more. Each novel comes as a one-time purchase, no subscriptions, no hidden fees. After payment, you'll receive full access via Telegram, along with all future updates for that novel. You'll find a wide selection of your favorite genres and titles, always in premium audio quality. Check the full list of available novels in the description. DM me now to get your favorite stories in audiobook form and start listening today. Chapter 1091, Striving to be Better. Chapter 1091, Striving to be Better. The end of the first day was pretty anticlimactic for the Reborn company. They earned a total of 0 tokens from their restaurant, though it was no fault of their own. The competition in this feast was simply far too fierce for their current level. Not only that, but they were also in the very worst spot of the worst spot. The center of the open field was already the worst part of the feast in general. After all, the conglomerates and the upper echelons were positioned in the corners and entryways of the thoroughfares, meaning that the customers would get to see their products first. And in a normal festival, this wouldn't be that much of an advantage. But in this world, where normal people could be nudged to eat at a certain restaurant not entirely out of their own choice, then being the first spot was certainly the best spot one could get. By the time the people walked through the spiraling pathway leading to the center of the feast, they were already full to their stomachs. In fact, most people don't even get to reach the center since they had chosen to go out of the festival as soon as they found themselves stuffed. So, their area didn't get that much traffic compared to the rest. And the few customers that did go there were quickly swooped up by their neighboring stalls. And in the end, this left Reborn with no tokens. But despite this, Michael wasn't disappointed. In fact, he was incredibly happy. Why? Well, his theory had been proven correct. At the end of the day, he brought everyone who worked on Reborn's stall back to their headquarters to do a small briefing. Tony, Remy, and the cooks stood at one side, completely disheartened after the chicken they cooked was left at the counter with no one to eat it. But they were still a little bit better compared to the advertisers. They were the Rebornians Michael employed to attract customers to their stalls. They were a combination of various talents such as musicians, orators, artists, etc. And as expected with the lack of customers attracted, they took this loss the hardest. At least with the cooks, they knew their product was good. McTony's chicken was delicious. If people got the chance to eat it, then they were confident everyone would quickly get hooked. The advertisers, on the other hand, knew that this loss happened precisely because they couldn't do their job properly. They couldn't spread the word of McTony's chicken to anyone. They were outclassed and outmatched in every way possible. Their voices felt like a drop of water compared to the ocean. They were getting drowned out no matter how much they shouted. The musicians felt their stringed instruments shivering from fear after hearing other, much powerful songs ringing from their neighbors. The orators lost their voice. The artists felt that their two-dimensional paintings lacked a lot compared to the ethereal, magical, and hunger-inducing paintings that their opponents had plastered on their stall's header. Michael looked at everyone. "Lift up your heads," he said to them. "Today was not a loss. It was an eye-opener. I wanted all of you to see the difference between our current level and the level that we strive to become." They all lifted their heads, feeling better from his words. Do you feel that you were lacking? Then become better. Reach within yourselves and awaken your latent potential. And with that inspiring speech, Michael secretly opened up his shadow inventory. Hundreds of flaming white drops shot up into the air and created an entire miniature, black and white galaxy above everyone's heads. Then, as these downcast and disheartened Rebornians strengthened their resolve, the drops of God-forged pieces dove right into their hearts, blessing them with the power of a magnetic. It's working. Michael was incredibly elated to see his hypothesis working exactly as he thought. That was right. He had planned this whole thing out just to galvanize his Rebornians into becoming magnetics. The 25 orators found their voice. As soon as the godly, silver liquid settled into their hearts, ability power immediately wrapped around their voice boxes and enhanced their vocal reach. Strangely, their divas weren't humanoid. They bore great resemblances to various brands and types of speakers and mics. The only difference was that these divas had mouths and eyes, making them look like mimics. Then the musicians awakened. The orchestra of 20 people found themselves awakening with anthropomorphized musical notes as their divas. Next, the artists became magnetics as well. They were a combination of painters, sculptors, needleworkers, toy makers, etc. There were 30 people in total, and all of them became magnetics. And as expected, their divas were related to their arts. For example, sculptors got stone figures. These strings of awakenings definitely proved one thing. Competition allowed people to push themselves to be better. In every single instance where Rebornians became magnetics, it was preceded by an event in which they found their own skills to be lacking compared to the others. The orcs found themselves insecure in their own shadows, so they obscured themselves deeper. The engineers and construction workers learned how easy it was for others to destroy their work, so they strived to build something better. And now, these Rebornians strive to become better after seeing other magnetics in their own field. They were the catalyst they needed. And if wasting the first day of the feast was what it took for his allies to evolve, then that's what he was going to do. Of course, not everyone became a magnetic. There were some jobs among them that were totally unrelated to the food industry, like a laundry washer or a dye maker. He sent them out expecting them to not awaken. But there were also some talents here that did become a magnetic that he never expected. For example, there was a single person here with a peculiar talent called theater maker that Michael was very curious about. Chapter 1092 Second Day of Feast. Chapter 1092 Second Day of Feast. The blue monkey was named Hamlin, and he seemed to have an A-class talent for theatrics. What does theater have to do with food? He couldn't understand why Hamlin awakened as a magnetic. Perhaps it had something to do with entertainment? That would certainly attract customers. Boss Michael, please let me help, Hamlin said. I have just thought of the best musical play for McTony's. Michael raised his eyebrow. That wasn't a bad idea. In fact, it may just be the thing they needed to finally get more customers. After all, the customers in this feast may not get the opportunity to visit their restaurant. But that didn't mean that they could only draw from the customers here. They had to think outside the box. Literally. They could simply advertise the McTony's chicken outside of the feast venue and lead them inside the stall to buy some chicken. This would actually be the best way since all of their previous customers were outside of New Sparta. Once they led them inside, then they would have customers who were specifically looking for their specific product. Michael nodded at Hamlin. Then I'll leave that to you, he said. The blue monkey enthusiastically pumped his fists. I won't disappoint you, boss. Then Castell approached Michael. Young master, I have taken stock of our new magnetics. And I think that this would be the best course of action. As expected of their CEO, Castell already had a game plan ready for tomorrow. She had perfectly given the new magnetics missions that would efficiently show off their new powers to the outside world. Now that they actually had the power to fight against magnetics, it was time for them to actually participate in the feast. Finally, the second day of the feast came. Tony, Remy, and the rest of the chefs were up bright and early to prepare their kitchen for the upcoming day. Then, as soon as the giant horn boomed outside, signaling the official start of the feast, the Rebornian advertisers marched out of their stall like a well-manned army. And even though it was still super early in the morning, the visitors had already formed a crowd through the pathways. In fact, there seemed a lot more now than yesterday, which bode well for Reborn. The magnetics from their neighboring companies immediately used their ability power, casting their line like fishermen to catch some of the customers swimming past them. But this time, a new voice echoed out from beside them. McTony's chicken is open for business. A sensation so exotic that even mages can't help but gasp. We're sure you've never tasted something like this. Hello, Mister. Would you like a free taste of our chicken? In an instant, the mindless zombie customers who were going to ignore the Reborn company immediately snapped out of their reverie. They turned towards the lamias and satyrs, luring them in. Seeing the free sample of fried chicken in their hands certainly helped their case. A few people approached the Rebornians, taking a taste of McTony's chicken for the first time. Oh my! This is so good! Why haven't I tried this out before? Were you guys not here yesterday? The immediate positive reactions from the sample attracted even more customers, creating a domino effect that became a bigger and better wave as it continued on. It started from a handful to a few tens of people, until there was a whole crowd blocking the natural flow of the thoroughfare in the feast. Everyone wanted a taste of McTony's chicken. The Rebornian advertisers led their customers into their restaurant. First, it was okay. But as people began to come in and out of the restaurant, the inaccessibility of their location became an even more apparent problem. People had to squeeze through the tight passages in between tents to get inside. And if someone wanted to get out, they'd have to wait until it was their turn. This caused a blockage outside and slowed down their customer turnover rate. But all in all, it was still a positive effect. The crowd gathering in front of them actually got a lot of curious looks, which helped them get their name out in front of the public. Why is the line here so long? I heard that a secret restaurant just popped up. I had a taste of their chicken, and it's to die for. Seeing such a large group of hungry and dissatisfied customers, Reborn's neighboring companies immediately tried to rope them into their own stalls. Come on and try our spicy dessert. And the response? The customers were still focused on McTony's chicken. Even when they tried to use their magnetic powers, the natural curiosity of the public still won out. And when they tried to force it, Rebornian orators immediately pooled their strengths together to drown out their voices. What? How did the Reborn company get multiple allure-type magnetics? Am I just mistaken? Or were those demi-humans not magnetics yesterday? Rebornian orators were only in the first stage, but their combined strengths allowed them to overcome 5th to 7th stage magnetics. Hopefully, this would be enough for them to jump up in the feast's rankings. Jimmy, the Rebornian reporter, gave Michael a parchment paper containing yesterday's results. There were about 50 companies participating in total. The conglomerates already had tokens in the tens of millions by the first day. Meanwhile, the bottom 5 companies ranged to about 30,000 each. Which means that we'll need about 60,000 tokens today if we want to jump up a few spots, said Jimmy. Michael turned towards Castell, who had been manning the cashier this entire time. How much did we earn in those few hours? He asked her. 10,000 tokens, young master. And it is still rising. If this continues, we can expect our revenue to be about 100,000 tokens today. Michael pumped his fists. This was a good first step. However, he was not satisfied with just that. He wanted to take the top spots. Chapter 1093 posters. Chapter 1093 posters. Right now, they held the majority of the customers in the central area. Their numerous and combined efforts to spread the word about the McTony's chicken had worked wonders, allowing them to finally overcome the hurdle of advertisement. And if things went the way it was going, then they'd be able to go up the rankings in the feast. But they could still go up higher. They could reach the top 10 spots, allowing them to have a small percentage of Tri-States territory, thereby allowing them to finally have a bridge that connects them to the upper echelons. Their current customer base was still a small fraction of the whole feast. They hadn't even reached 5% of the total market. So, just as they planned yesterday, the magnetic artist's work was finally allowed to see the light of day. Has it been delivered? Michael asked Shiina. The white-scaled dragonborn looked over a paper checklist on her hands. Yes, Lord Michael. We've printed at least 1,000 copies of each. She handed him over a colorful and eye-catching poster with the bold title, McTony's Chicken, written so legibly that it could be seen from tens of meters away. He could sense the faint echo of ability power emanating out of this poster. According to ChatJK6, this would allow even the blind to see what was written on the paper. That was one of their artists' ability power. Then, there was a sumptuous depiction of McTony's chicken pasted front and center on the paper. There was even a faint scent of that unique spice that their chicken was so popular for. One would think that they would be able to taste the chicken just from reading the poster alone. This also came from an ability power. Each and every single aspect on this advertising poster attracted the attention of anyone in its close vicinity. It was the collaborative effort of almost 30 artists, all of whom spent the entire night all up to this morning, editing and changing the message to get the best effects. And the poster in Michael's hands were the results of that effort. Thanks to an artist's ability power, they were able to copy and paste the poster into tens of thousands of blank paper, and still retain the magnetic effects that the artists embedded into the art. And now, those posters were being delivered right in front of their restaurant. They had planned to distribute these early in the morning, but designing and printing these magnetic posters took a lot of effort. Castell clapped her hands. Okay, everybody. 25 orator magnetics, and 100 more mortal Rebornians stood at attention with their CEO's words. You all have a job to do. In a few minutes, we'll distribute these posters in your pocket dimensions, and it will be your job to hand them out to everyone you see. They all nodded. They heard these instructions yesterday. So after going over their designated quadrants in the feast, they departed. Now because half a day had already passed, they wouldn't feel the effects of these posters until the next day. And according to Castell's calculations, they'd be able to get approximately a 500% boost in all of their sales. That would be about 50,000 tokens, which meant that by the end of the third day, they'd be able to get 60,000 tokens in total. That wasn't bad at all. That would get them in the top 45 of all the companies participating in the feast. But of course, Michael wasn't satisfied with that. Only the top 10 companies would have a reward at the end of the week. Michael needed to get tokens in the millions if he wanted to compete with the conglomerates and the upper echelons. And given that he'd basically wasted an entire day, he knew that they had to catch up using extraordinary measures. So he wasn't going to hold back. Young master, we have our advertisers deployed to the next circle in the feast. We'll be able to tap into the next customer base, Castell said. In truth, he wanted to have their posters spread all over the feast. But he knew that that wasn't possible. The conglomerates and the other upper echelons won't stand still as he poached their customers. And right now, his orator magnetics were still in the first stage of body formation. They couldn't quite go against the much-developed magnetics from the conglomerates. And from his initial survey, the magnetics in the second circle of the feast, meaning the circle beyond their central area, had magnetics only in the third or fourth stage, meaning his Rebornian magnetics could still beat them. We have also deployed our posters all over the Reborn territories, Castell said with a smile. That was right. The purpose of this whole poster advertisement was not just to get customers from the feast itself. He wanted to get all of their previous McTony's customers to visit their stall. Right now, there were probably hundreds of thousands of people who were eating McTony's chicken right now. Those were precious tokens that could be used to skyrocket them to the rankings. But they probably didn't even know that McTony participated in the feast. So they couldn't visit them. As of this moment, every franchise of McTony's located all around the gas stations of their highways were receiving coupons and posters directing them over to New Sparta. BU22. Boss Michael, our sources suggest that people have been receptive of the posters. There are many customers willing to visit our stalls. Ratata. We've also slowly implanted into their minds about our stall. They'll surely visit it. Michael was glad to hear that. But he knew that the effects of these posters would be gradual. People needed time to travel, especially if they were coming from the Lower Queens region. And since this feast only lasted a week, he knew that every second counted. Lord Michael, they're ready. Shiina stood back, revealing a group of people in bright, showy attire. They had frills on their wrists, their shoulders, everywhere. They had golden, booming instruments strapped on their shoulders. Trumpets, drum kits, etc. These were none other than the magnetic musicians of the Reborn company. They were going to be a part of their advertisement too. One of the most memorable things about a fast food chain was their music. It was the signal that allowed customers to remember their fond memories during a road trip, during times when a burger or a chicken would satiate their hunger while traveling hundreds of miles. That was right, he was going to make a McTony's jingle. Now, a music accompaniment for a restaurant wasn't original. In fact, there were multiple companies in the feast right now who were offering free music to their customers. It made their customers feel and prestigious, a place that was befitting of the high-end customers they were tailoring to. Almost all of the music they performed was grand and orchestral. It was very somber, something that was put on the background during a night out. But Michael knew the power of music. The power of the phenomenon called as LSS or the last song syndrome. Once the jingle was hooked into people's minds, it was very hard to get out. It was like a virus that had no cure. The only way to alleviate that was to go to the restaurant and satiate their hungers. Let me hear it, he said to the musicians. They all nodded at him, before unleashing their divas up in the skies. Then, with a signal, they started their music. Pa-pa-ra-pa-pa. I really love this. And that was it. That simple. Of course, Michael had to be honest. He did borrow a lot from a certain fast food chain back in his previous world. But that was because he knew how effective it was. Good. Now let's get this show on the road. In the second circle of the feast, the upper echelon companies ranked in the 40s continued on their business with a cutthroat attitude. They did everything in their power to keep everyone down. There were no alliances here. It was a dog-eat-dog world. They used all tactics, musicians, posters, and orators. And right now they were at a stalemate. No one was winning, no one was losing. Each of them had carved out a specific niche within the market. One focused on sweets, some on lunch deals, while some on exotic fishes. But suddenly there was a change. Come on down. Get your marlin wyvern meat here. The orator Magnetic scattered his ability power, creating a net that covered the crowd of customers walking through the pathway. Being a fifth-stage body formation cultivator, he was able to get about 80% of his target audience without losing them to the other orator Magnetics around him. But this time, he only got 40%. Do you want to try out our newest dessert special? He asked a passing customer. The passerby waved his hand no. In his hands were a new type of poster he had never seen before. Sorry, I want to try out this McTony's chicken. I heard it's spicy. Chapter 1094, just a sample. Chapter 1094, just a sample. All throughout the second circle of the feast, an entirely new phenomenon was happening. The customer base was slowly dwindling, and it all seemed to be because of one single thing. The Reborn posters. Not only was it more eye-catching than even the sample foods that they were putting out in the streets, but it was also generating more conversations from the public. Hey, have you heard about McTony's chicken? That painting looks absolutely delicious. Let's go and see. These customers who were supposed to be eating at their restaurant were instead traveling all the way to the center of the feast to try out this new chicken. The upper echelon companies were absolutely baffled after hearing about this. So they quickly investigated and found one of the posters being handed out. They're made with ability power. That's how it's catching everyone's attention. I can sense the echoes of multiple magnetics in the product. That's impossible. These upper echelon companies knew just how difficult it was to create a product made with the collaboration of multiple magnetics, especially those with an artistic talent. By definition, each magnetic was unique on their own. They had their own different talents, and usually, they clashed against each other. This was because everyone had their own vision about what art could be. So, when multiple magnetic artists try to create a single product, it would almost certainly end up as a total mess. Either one of them would win out against the others, or each talent would cancel each other out, creating a mediocre and half-done product. But this poster was completely the opposite. It must have been made by 10 or more magnetics, yet they were able to have a singular vision that allowed them to create a product that was mountains beyond what they could individually achieve. It was multiplicative instead of additive. What kind of company would specialize in rearing magnetic artists like these? Only a high-ranking company could invest in magnetic artists like that. So they investigated the poster even further. The answer was clearly written on bold letters. McTony's Chicken? Everyone's raving about this new product? It's not even. They were about to say something about the strange-looking fried chicken in the poster, but as soon as they focused on the chicken, they were transported into an intimate restaurant, with the McTony's Chicken in their hands, ready to eat. Even they couldn't help but admit that the chicken looked scrumptious. In fact, if they weren't in the competition, they probably would have wanted to buy one for themselves. They knew that this didn't just come from the poster itself. The magnetics simply amplified the senses of the product, like its perceived taste, its scent, and its crunchy outer layer. In short, the fried chicken itself was good. Because of this, many companies in the second layer of the feast decided to send a scout to find out the mystery of whose company this McTony's restaurant belonged to. So, the spies ended up traveling to the center area of the feast. And there they saw a strange sight. A large crowd had gathered in the pathways, leaving only a small path for people to walk on. Multiple stalls had their employees out, shouting at the top of their lungs, trying their best to lure these customers to their restaurant. But to no avail. They didn't want to leave the giant queue they were on, or else they'd have to wait another hour before they could get inside. They followed the flow of the crowd, eventually seeing them squeeze through the tight passageway between two company stalls, leading to the back. What is this? Is there even a restaurant there? And usually, with a crowd this big, people would get bored and become impatient. But somehow they didn't. The crowd only got more intrigued the bigger it got. Just then, the spies heard a sound echoing throughout the entire area. It was an instrumental song. Light, lively, and very easy to listen to. They easily deduced the song itself to be made by magnetic musicians. But somehow, the amplifying effect wasn't part of it. Then, dispersed throughout the rhythmic orchestra, was a choir singing, "Pa para papa." I really love this. It was short and catchy enough to not be annoying even though it had been playing nonstop throughout the entire day. People didn't even notice it at first, as the song itself was designed to be an invisible background music. But somehow they would end up repeating that catchphrase throughout the day. Even the spies subconsciously mimed to the song in their minds while they waited in the queue. Pa para papa. The spies couldn't help but be alarmed. Were they using some kind of viral worm implanted through the song? But they didn't have the time to wonder about that. The queue finally led them to the restaurant. And there they saw an entirely new world. The restaurant itself looked bright, with multiple lights beaming down from the tent poles. Then, pictures of the fried chicken were posted all over the walls, making it look even more appetizing than before. It didn't help that the scent of the chicken was the most concentrated here. "Hello, welcome to McTony's. May I take your order?" The upper echelon companies waiting for their spies to come back were starting to get impatient. It had been hours since they sent them out on the mission, and they still hadn't returned. At first, they thought that their spies had been caught. But then, just before the second day ended, their spies finally returned. And with gifts, it seemed. With them were multiple strangely shaped boxes which were still smoking from the heat. "What were you guys doing? We only sent you out to scout our competition." The spies kneeled. "We're sorry, boss. We originally wanted to gather more information, but we ended up losing track of time." Their leader frowned. "Was the queue really that long? I've heard about it even here in the second circle." "Well, yes, but that's not the reason why we were late. We lost track of time while eating." The other members of their company were completely befuddled by their spy's confession. All of that time, they were just eating, and here they thought they were being tortured for information. "Before you scold us, boss, we've brought takeout from McTony's restaurant." Takeout. The people here had never heard of that term. The spies then opened up the small, handheld cardboard boxes from their cart. And there, their leaders saw a myriad of fried chicken and all of their varieties ready to be eaten. "Boss, you have to try this for yourself. That's why we bought them all." Their leader's face was dark. "You bought all of these? So you gave our opponent more tokens." The spies knew that they wouldn't get out of this one without a proper excuse. So all they could do was get everyone on board. "Please try it out." Their leader looked at the box of fried chicken being presented to him with a wary look. His face remained stoic. But then, his stomach started to rumble. "Maybe just a taste," he said. And as soon as he took a single bite, his eyes widened. His employees thought he was being poisoned. "Boss, spit that out." But before they could slap his back and forcefully regurgitate the poison, their leader immediately swatted their hands. Then, without saying anything else, he began to devour the chicken within a few bites. His employees were completely dumbfounded when they saw this. Their leader was notoriously picky with his food. He didn't even eat their own products. "Is it really good?" asked one of their employees, before he reached out to one of the takeout boxes to taste. But then, their boss immediately moved at the speed of light and blocked him from taking one. "No, this sample is only for me. For research purposes," he said. Then he turned to his spies. "You, go buy more samples for these guys to study. And more for me too. A 2-piece chicken would be nice. Extra spicy with bread and mayo on the side. Just to study." His employees were stunned. Was their leader addicted to eating one of their opponent's food? He was totally contradicting himself from earlier. At the end of the second day, it became painfully clear who owned the McToney's restaurant. The infamous Reborn Company. When they heard that the Reborn Company was somehow able to squeeze themselves into the feast, they thought it was a nuisance, but it was manageable. After all, Reborn would be placed at the worst possible location in the feast. They'd be lucky to get a few tokens by the end of the week. And the first day proved that. According to the official rankings by VOT, the Reborn Company had 0 tokens for the entire time. But now, on the second day, they suddenly burst onto the scene, completely stealing everyone's customers. They had suddenly jumped to the top of 40th place in one fell swoop. Chapter 1095 Visiting Mage. Chapter 1095 Visiting Mage. At the end of the second day, Michael and the rest of the Rebornians went back into the restaurant to discuss their plans for the next day. "Good job, everyone," said Shiina. "I would like to congratulate you all for your hard work." Jaku rolled his eyes. "Get on with it. Tell us how many tokens we got on the second day." The white-scaled dragonborn smiled at her older brother, but it wasn't a very friendly one. "Ahem. Before I was rudely interrupted, I was already going to announce our total tokens." She looked over the paper in her hands, given to her by Jimmy from the official rankings produced by VOT's Draconians. At the beginning of the day, we estimated to earn about 10,000 tokens. We surpassed that and more. We were able to obtain 31,925 tokens in total. Elated gasps rang out from everybody in the room. The new magnetics heaved a sigh of relief. All of their hard work had finally shown its fruits of labor. They had proved that they were able to stand in place even against the powerful upper echelons. "The Reborn Company is now ranked in the 44th place," Castell proudly announced. This was a very surprising outcome. Michael only expected them to go up a few spots. But in the end, they were able to surpass 5 upper echelon companies in just a single day of operation. It must be taken into account that they earned 0 tokens during the first day. Those upper echelons had already earned tens of thousands by then. The fact that they were able to surpass them in such a short amount of time was a very good sign. And they'd only been able to use the posters and the musical jingles halfway through the day. If they had started with that advantage, then they would have earned twice what they earned today. And in the next few days, we will continue to ramp up our operations. Our musicians, artists, and orators will be hard at work in advertising our products to more and more inner circles in the feast, Castell announced. Everyone was, of course, very pumped to go into the next day with even more passion and fervor. Once the meeting was over, everyone except the Rebornian officers were dismissed. Castell, Michael, Yuna, the Dragonborns, and the Orc chieftains remained. "Young master, although we have shown great growth on the second day, I do not think." She couldn't finish her words, but Michael knew what she was getting to. "I know. We're in trouble." It wasn't hard to guess. One would simply have to use simple arithmetic to understand that catching up to the conglomerates and the other upper echelon companies was almost nigh impossible. If everything went well tomorrow, the best they could earn was around 100,000 tokens. And in the next few days, that would only grow around in the 1 to 2% at the best case scenario. In the worst case, they'd lose customers. It wasn't a matter of their product. McToney's chicken was a massive viral hit. Anyone who tried it would immediately want to order more the next day if they could. But that was the exact problem. They couldn't. McToney's restaurant only had a limited number of tables and chairs to accommodate their customers. Meaning the upper limit of their possible customer base was bottlenecked by the area of their stalls. In a given moment, only about 100 or so people could fit in the restaurant. And even if the restaurant had a good turnover rate, meaning people came in and out of the restaurant at a near-perfect efficiency, then their best outcome would still be only a few tens of thousands customers in a single day. That wasn't enough to contend with the conglomerates and the upper echelons. They had massive restaurants the size of mansions. It could easily accommodate thousands of people in a single time. And the Reborn Company only had a small backyard as their stall. And the fact that people had to squeeze their way through a tight space just to enter their restaurant meant that they would never reach a perfect turnover rate no matter what they did. So, no matter how many people they attracted to their restaurant, they wouldn't actually increase the number of tokens they received in a single day. Most of those new customers would only be waiting for hours and hours in the queue before they could get into the restaurant. No matter how delicious McTony's chicken was, people only had a limited amount of patience when it came to eating food. Hunger made everyone impatient. Even today, there must have been 1,000 people who were in the queue while the second day of the feast came into a close. Those were precious tokens that they couldn't earn simply because they didn't have the capacity. This was something that they couldn't solve with their own powers. It was an inherent problem that came with the location. They were truly put in the worst spot ever. With that way things went, there was only a very low chance that they could actually place in the top 10 spot in the feast. Was his ambition too lofty? Just then, they heard a knock from the door. They were the only company still in their restaurant in the feast, so this couldn't have been one of their neighbors. Who is it? Michael asked, using his supreme talent to take a peek at their visitor. And as soon as his perception focused on the mana, he was immediately blinded. Earth mana manifested as green motes of light burst out of their visitor like they were the sun incarnate. Powerful. The door slid open, and Michael came face to face with an older woman wearing dirted overalls, with grime and oil all over her face. Just a superficial glance at this woman, one would think she was a beggar on the streets. But Michael knew better than to underestimate that hidden mystical power beneath her. Yo, it's me, Rivet. Chapter 1096 Delaying? Chapter 1096 Delaying? Rivet, the mystic master of metal. Michael didn't think that she would actually visit him. Now, she did say that she would stop by when she texted him, but there was a part of him thinking that that was only a lie. In fact, he had half a mind that she truly wasn't the one who she said she was. Anyone could pretend to be anybody in a text message. But now that she was right here in front of him, there was no doubt in his mind that she was a person who had reached the peak of magic. She was radiating earth mana. Not light mana that all people naturally had, but earth mana. If he saw her in a mountainside, he wouldn't have even noticed her amongst the nature around her. This was the first time he'd seen this. He'd been neglecting his magic studies simply because he felt that they were limiting compared to magnetics and ability power. In his mind, any kind of magic that a person could use was immediately dwarfed by a reality-altering power that a diva releases. But perhaps that was only because he hadn't seen the peak of magic yet. Even Cerberus Augendor, the mystic master back in the King's region, still seemed human compared to Rivet. Or was Cerberus only hiding his power? He didn't know. Oh, this is nice and cozy, Rivet said as she observed the restaurant. She walked forwards, looking at the light bulb illuminating everything from the ceiling. Amazing. I've only heard about electricity in a letter. But to think that it uses no magic at all is simply fantastical. How does electricity become light? And ooh, how about that box thing? How does electricity become cool air? Rivet began to gush and be curious about all the technology Michael integrated into the restaurant. She seemed to go off into her own world, completely forgetting that she was in the presence of other people. In fact, if it weren't for Michael waving his hand at her to take her attention, she would have probably taken the air conditioning apart just so that she could understand it better. Oh right, that's not why I'm here, Rivet remembered. My name is Rivet Ironmane, and I represent the metal department of the Guild of Arcana. Michael shook her hand. I'm Michael. These are my friends. Rivet's eyes widened as she finally took stock of Michael's allies. Most of them were demi-human, including the infamous white-scale dragonborn that took New Sparta by storm. Ah, the demi-human magnetics, she shouted. How fascinating. They've gotten stronger. Rivet heard about the Reborn company's army of demi-human construction worker magnetics. They built the gas station in New Sparta and properly cemented the Reborn company as someone who specialized in construction. That's what people thought Reborn would do to increase their golden rankings. But instead of focusing on their strengths, the Reborn company instead chose to enter the feast and compete with the upper echelons. Many thought they were way too hasty. Even Rivet thought so. But seeing the people around her, she realized that they were all non-combat magnetics with various talents among them. These were entirely new magnetics. She didn't know if Michael was simply bad in managing his Godforge pieces, or they had more than they were letting on. You're really intent on participating in this feast, aren't you? Michael nodded. Why? Is that bad? Rivet put her hands on her waist. I presume you already figured out why the upper echelons gave you this bad location, right? They know you won't be able to climb up the rankings no matter how much you try. So in my opinion, you shouldn't have wasted your time on this feast. It's just a formality. No one is intended to win except the conglomerates. Only the upper echelons have any chance at breaking through to the top spots. Then you should have simply focused on your strengths. Construction, automobiles, And this phone. She then took out her phone, which Michael noticed to be in perfect condition. But after seeing Rivet in person, it wasn't hard to guess that she had probably taken the phone apart and studied it intensely. That strange and innovative technology is your path to the upper echelons. You can't be spreading your strength too thin. That would only delay your growth. Think of the upper echelons. They spent their time honing one aspect of their market, either in the commerce sector, the food sector, or any other service. And once they become the best at that niche, they'll break through to the upper echelons. Usually, a company takes more than 10 years to do so, if they're lucky. Then, if they want to go even further up the rankings, then they slowly start to expand their services. They start offering food, lodging services, etc. The more markets they can conquer, the higher they rise up the rankings. But of course, that takes even more time. They'd need to spend at least a decade in each sector of the market if they want to become good enough to compete with the rest of the upper echelons. That's why at that stage they start acquiring sub-companies. It's much easier to swallow a new company that's already good at that specific market rather than build something from scratch. And once your company conquers all of the markets in the world, then and only then could they be considered as a conglomerate. If each sector of the market took 10 years to conquer, then if one wanted to become a conglomerate, then the company would need a few hundred years to become one. No wonder conglomerates were so revered. Only the best of the best could achieve that level. In my opinion, your technological products are good enough to become upper echelon level in just a few years. If you focus on that, you won't need to compete in this feast. In Rivet's opinion, Michael was only delaying their progress by participating in this feast. The way Michael was going now, Rivet would have mistaken him aiming to become a conglomerate first before becoming an upper echelon. Chapter 1097 Spicy Mana Sense. Chapter 1097 Spicy Mana Sense. That's why I suggest for you to focus on one thing before you try and master everything, Rivet surmised. And as tragic as it is, the Reborn company probably won't become mature enough to be a conglomerate in your lifetime. It'll need generation after generation to fully grow into an entity that can change the world. No one has done that. Well, except one. But they're more the exception rather than the rule. You aren't trying to do that, are you? She said, joking. But when she looked at Michael's eyes, she didn't see a kid unaware of the difficulty he had to surpass. He is lucid. He knew exactly what he was doing. You! Michael understood everything Rivet was trying to say. And truly, she was thinking of the best route for the Reborn company. However, his ambition was lofty. As the famous adage said, go big or go home. He looked directly at Rivet. My grandfather can create the Vanderbilt company from the ground up and transform it to a global company in less than 100 years. Why can't I? Rivet couldn't help but laugh after hearing that. Not because she didn't think he could do it, but because she loved the courage and tenacity it took for Michael to dream that big. With how quickly his technology has taken over New Sparta, perhaps he will be able to recreate Eyes. Wait! Chills ran down her spine. Your grandfather? Eyes Vanderbilt is your grandfather. Michael nodded, confirming her guess. It was at this point that Rivet couldn't help but look at Michael with a completely new light. He was a Vanderbilt. Michael Vanderbilt. A storm of thoughts surged in her mind. This was an entirely new context onto everything that she had seen this entire time. He was a Vanderbilt. Of course. He had the blood of the mighty lion. No wonder Michael seemed to have business acumen that rivaled even that of the upper echelons even though he was so young. And you're not using your last name, she realized. If Michael wasn't advertising his true lineage, this meant that he was trying to build something out of his own backbone. It was at that point that she realized just how lofty and ballsy Michael's dream was. He wasn't trying to just become a conglomerate. He was trying to become the top company in the entire world. This meant that he would have to defeat his own family's company at one point. Rivet pulled a chair and took a seat. She shook her head and laughed. The Vanderbilt heirs were infamous for being soft. It was widely known that Ai's heirs didn't have the same fangs that he had. They didn't have what it takes to maintain a company at the top of the world. That was why many people were being so bold and actually trying to defeat the Vanderbilt company. If it was 50 years ago when the lion of the Vanderbilts was at his prime, no one would even have the courage to compete against a Vanderbilt, even if it was just a small branch or a sub-company. This whole feast and New Sparta as a whole would have to bow down to the Vanderbilts. But of course, Eyes was subject to the eternal curse that was time. He'd soon succumb to his own age. Eyes' power was slowly deteriorating. Unfortunately for the Vanderbilts, people realized that the lion had no true heirs to pass down his company to. This was a weakness. This was blood in the water. Once Eyes inevitably grew too old to manage his company, the sharks would quickly pounce and take the top spot for themselves. That was the only reason why none of the conglomerates had yet to try and usurp the Vanderbilts, was because even in his old age, Eyes was still a true top dog of the world. But time comes for them all. Once the patriarch of the Vanderbilt falls, so too would his empire. It looks like you at least have one heir. Rivet muttered to herself. It seemed that all the talents and powers were funneled down into their youngest grandson. And you're right, Miss Rivet. I shouldn't spread my resources too thin if I want my products to be good. But who said that it's not worthy of the upper echelons? A jack of all trades was a master of none. But oftentimes it's better than a master of one. Michael gestured for Remy to come forward. The boy took something out of his pocket dimension and presented it to Rivet. Immediately, Rivet smelled the scent of dragon's whiskers. Her eyes widened. Try our McTony's fried chicken, Michael said. She took one look at the crispy, red skin of the chicken and couldn't help but salivate. Dragon's whiskers. That's extremely hard to handle. How did you incorporate it into a meal? Rivet wondered. Even the alchemists back in the Guild of Arcana were unable to manipulate dragon's whiskers into their own medicinal formulas because of its volatility. Yet, they were able to use it in a fried chicken recipe? Not only that, but they were also able to imbue a sense of immutability in its formula. Secretly, she tried to prod the chicken using her innate mana sense to see its properties, just like taking apart a puzzle to see how to solve it. But any change she made was immediately rejected. What a powerful ability power, she muttered. The very idea of McTony's fried chicken was immutable. This alone had put them on equal grounds with the other upper echelons who specialized in the food industry. Rivet took the chicken from the plate and sniffed it. Then she took a bite. Immediately, a spicy sense tingled in her tongue. It wasn't a normal spice from capsaicin. It was a spice that affected her very perception of mana. It was like scratching an itch that just couldn't be reached with any physical means. It wasn't long before she devoured the entire chicken, and found herself wanting for more. Chapter 1098 More Products. Chapter 1098 More Products. Rivet couldn't believe it. McTony's chicken was actually a food in the same quality as the upper echelons. In fact, she could see it as becoming a special dish in some of the high-class and fancy cuisine restaurants among the conglomerates. It was simple but perfect. It was food that was exotic but was basic enough to be palatable to eat every single day. This is amazing. She immediately knew that this chicken would be a big hit amongst magicians and wizards. Their sense of mana was stronger than most, so they would feel the intoxicating effects of the spice much harder as well. Okay, I'll admit it when I'm wrong. This chicken can actually win you the feast, she admitted. Michael was glad to hear that. But it's unfortunate that you were placed at the worst spot possible. If you had a space in the third or even the second circle, you could easily contend with the top 10 companies. The second circle contained those upper echelon companies ranked in the 40th to 45th level. The third circle was, of course, bigger, so those at the 30th to 39th rank were designated at that place. If the Reborn company had been at that spot, they would have earned millions of tokens in a single day without problem. Unfortunately, they were stuck with what they had. We're working on it, Michael said. But in the meantime, the only way we could upscale our business is to add more items on the menu. That was one of the solutions he came up with. If they only had a limited amount of people in the restaurant for a given time, then the only way they could earn more tokens was if people bought more products from them. And despite how delicious McTony's chicken was, most people would only buy 1 or 2 orders at a maximum. It was a very filling meal. So, people would only spend about 1 or 2 tokens each visit. But if the restaurant had more offerings in store, like some side dishes or some drinks, then they could increase that to 4 or 5 tokens per customer. We actually have a new product we're trying out. Do you want a taste? Michael offered. Rivet was going to decline. She didn't come here to eat. She came here to do business. But when Michael presented her with an orange cone with a white, swirly cream at the top, she stopped her words. What is this? It's called soft-serve ice cream. It's a cold dessert. Rivet accepted the cone from Michael. Cold smoke emanating out of the entire thing. Curious, she took a taste off the top. And immediately, a cold sensation covered the spice, still left over from the fried chicken. It was like finding water in the desert. It was a brief respite that allowed Rivet to feel relief from the spicy chicken. It perfectly complements the chicken, she realized. It was only now that she realized that the two products perfectly complemented one another. If one felt their chicken to be too spicy, then they could eat the soft-serve ice cream after to cleanse their palate. It was like a small prize after completing that spicy challenge. And now that Rivet tasted both products, she was sure that she would want to order both if she wanted a meal. That was a good sign. Gosh, I wish I could eat this every day, she said. You can always visit our restaurant. You don't have to wait in the queue, Michael offered. Rivet shook her head disappointingly. I can't. I'll be busy for the rest of the week completing my lectures. That's actually one of the reasons why I wanted to see you. I will be personally doing a lecture about automobiles to inform the public about its inner mechanism. You wouldn't mind, right? Michael nodded. Go ahead. There are still some people who are afraid that automobiles are made from the souls of magical beasts. TriStar's anti-automobile campaign had done some permanent damage to the public perception of cars. It was a very small percentage of people, but it was there nonetheless. "I'll even send an automobile for your lecture," he said. "That would be great," Rivet replied. "I'll pay for it. And I'll pay for the phones that I wanted to buy." That was the original reason why she wanted to meet Michael. She wanted to buy more phones. Thankfully, she gave him a heads up so he was able to create them ahead of time. 3,000 units was not easy to produce. Which brings me to my next thing. This phone. Why don't you start producing more? Start selling them to the public. Rivet clearly understood the potential of the phone. Otherwise, she wouldn't have bought 3,000 of them for her friends and allies. This was what she was implying when she said that he should start focusing on his technological products. Michael pursed his lips. If he simply knew how to mass-produce Unity power sources, he would have done so. But he couldn't. He'd need thousands of Unity clones to do so. "Is it because of that strange power source?" Rivet asked. Michael was not surprised she figured it out. She was a mystic master for a reason. "That is exactly right," he said. "I can't make that many batteries at the moment, so I can't mass-produce them like the automobiles." Then, she said something that completely changed Michael's perspective on the situation. "Why don't you use something else? Something that isn't an eternal power source, like the one in your automobiles." Michael slapped his own forehead. That was it. He could just use a normal battery, one that needed to be recharged. Before, he didn't want to do that because it would require their users to access an electrical outlet to power their phones. And since this is the medieval world, they don't have an outlet to recharge. But then he realized he could just build one for them. Chapter 1099 Normal Phone Idea. Chapter 1099 Normal Phone Idea. The reason why Michael hadn't created a normal cell phone without an infinite battery source was because he knew that the problem of recharging would be a tremendous undertaking to solve. First, he'd have to get everybody accustomed to the idea of electricity and plugging things in to recharge them. But to do that, he'd have to actually install electric lines in the place that he was going to sell phones in. But since he knew how hard it was to create a project that big, he deferred that to the future. He wanted to conquer most of the royal continent first, so that he wouldn't have much trouble creating multiple electricity power generators all over the place. However, things had changed. They had magnetic engineers now. Just like with the Mobius automobile factory, Michael was sure that his engineers and construction workers could create power plants without much trouble in a few days. It would actually kill two birds with one stone. He could sell more phones and he could sell electricity. Of course, there was still a problem of people actually accepting electricity as a power source. He guessed that many inhabitants of New Sparta wouldn't be so receptive to someone unknown installing strange black wires in their own territory. But there was an easy solution for that. Just make a gas station but for electricity. Instead of people going with their automobiles to refuel, people would instead go to the electricity station to recharge their phones. If this went as he planned, then people would quickly get used to electricity and its appliances, therefore people would be more receptive to having electricity in their own homes. By then, they'd want to pay money in order to get electricity. "Looks like you had a good idea there," Rivet said. Michael nodded. "Yeah, I have a solution for the phones." "So you're going to start selling them in the public?" "Soon," he promised. He didn't want to divert their energy into a new project when they were still struggling to get tokens here in the feast. ChatJK6, remind me to talk with Kong later this evening. There's no need for that. Would you like me to issue a mission for him and all the other Rebornian engineers to start creating plans for an electric power plant? Michael immediately said yes. He almost forgot that Rebornian magnetics were now connected to ChatJK6 and could receive her notifications. New mission from Michael. Create a power plant blueprint and all its subsequent infrastructure suitable for the inhabitants of New Sparta. Reward. Plus 100,000 merits. Plus 5 skill points. 10 kilograms of Godforge pieces. Plus 1 private picture of Michael. Michael tilted his head at that reward. The first few were very good rewards that could actually benefit the magnetics. But that last one was very disturbing. Who would want a picture of him? But it was at that moment when he suddenly heard consecutive ringing bells all over his subconscious. Pop-up windows appeared in his vision. Kong, the Rebornian chief engineer, has accepted the mission. DJ, a main engineer, has accepted the mission with fervor. Jania, an architect, has accepted the mission by forgoing all the other rewards and only opted to receive the picture. That was fast. Michael didn't know if they were simply that excited about the project, or it was something else. One of them even chose to only get the most mundane reward out of all of them. But at least they accepted the mission. Michael was fine with that. Fudge, Michael's pet, has accepted the mission. Hey wait, don't let that mischievous slime into this mission. Too late, ChatJK6 said. Michael went through the mission list to try and reject Fudge's mission, but found it to be missing from the list entirely. ChatJK6 could have simply not given him the option to reject it. She didn't have to erase the paper trail. This was very suspicious. Anyway, Michael, I'll have to leave you for now. Rivet said those words, but strangely enough, she was still sitting at a table munching on the last bit of chicken on her plate. Ugh, I wish I could eat this every day. Unfortunately, it looked like Rivet would have to actually perform her duties as a mystic master. She would be stuck in New Sparta, performing lectures to the general public. And with such a famous person like her appearing in public, Michael had no doubt that she'd be swarmed by thousands upon thousands of people every single day. Even if she wanted to visit the restaurant, she wouldn't even be able to get out of her own house without getting swarmed. If only there was a way. Wait! Just as Rivet was about to leave, Michael finally got a very bright idea that would hopefully solve both of his problems at this moment. Can I borrow your phone? He said to her. She didn't hesitate and handed it over to him. He inputted some actions on the keyboard before returning the phone to her. There. Now, you can order McTony's chicken anytime you like. Rivet's eyebrows turned uneven until she put her eyes on the screen. On top was the title called McTony's Chicken, and on the bottom there were rows and rows of selection. 1-piece spicy McTony's chicken. 2-piece spicy McTony's chicken. McTony's burger chicken. What is this? Michael smiled at her. This is called a delivery app. You can input your order here by clicking on the option, and it would be added right into your online basket. Once you have your order, you can click on the checkout. She was able to follow his instructions easily, but she still couldn't understand the purpose of this new app. So, what will happen once I check out? Then your order will be delivered to you. She still couldn't comprehend the concept. You just have to input your current location, and our delivery riders will give your order to you in a couple of minutes. Chapter 1100 Rivet's Seminar. Chapter 1100 Rivet's Seminar. The next day, Rivet awoke from her sleep refreshed and happy. Her stomach rumbled. Even now, she was still hungry for some McTony's chicken. Even though she indulged herself yesterday with a literal mountain of fried chicken, Rivet still couldn't satiate her hunger. She looked around her temporary lodging while she was here in New Sparta. They did a lot to accommodate her. They filled the entire place with metal constructs, just like the way she wanted. The room smelled of oil. It was an environment that would be very good to experiment in. In fact, she wanted to take apart the automobile right now and study it for the entire day. And if she had some McTony's chicken to eat while working, then that would have been literal paradise. But she couldn't. She had a lecture very early in the day. She had many people depending on her. So, she walked over to her desk and found a fresh loaf of bread and hot soup. Boring. But this would have to do. Master Rivet. The door to her room burst wide open as a group of young men and women donning silver cloaks appeared running towards their master. What? She asked them, taking a bite out of the bread. Master, there's no time for that. You're late for the lecture. Immediately, Rivet's students grabbed onto the Mystic Master's cloak and dragged her out of her room. I can't even eat. I'm so hungry. She complained as her students dragged her away into a carriage that headed straight to New Sparta's Colosseum. That was where her lecture was going to take place. It housed hundreds of thousands of people, but they knew that it still wouldn't be enough to accommodate all those who wanted to see her lecture. People from all over the continent and all over the world want to take part in this once-in-a-lifetime event. There would also be some very important people who would be attending this lecture. They were very interested to hear her opinions about the ever-important and divisive automobile that had taken New Sparta by storm over the past few weeks. While they traveled over to the Colosseum, Rivet took out her phone and began fiddling with it, eventually landing on the delivery app Michael had taught her last night. Might as well try it, she said. The New Sparta Colosseum erupted with noise and applause as the esteemed Mystic Master appeared in the middle of everyone's eyes. It wasn't every day that a person of her caliber appeared in public. But today was a very important day. It was the day when people would form their opinions of the automobile. Even now, it was a controversial topic. Most of everyone in New Sparta had used the automobile in their daily lives, but it couldn't be helped if they were still a little bit wary about it. It was more than experimental. They had no idea how it worked, so they had no idea if it was going to explode while they worked, or if it would transform into a monster and swallow them whole. But if a mystic master of metal discussed her findings on the automobile, then people would finally form their true opinions on the matter. Everyone was here. The upper echelons and the conglomerates were very much interested in seeing what she had to say. Some wanted the automobile to finally be revealed as a monster or an illusion, while some wanted Rivet to reveal its secrets so that they could replicate it themselves. Either way, they had to sit down at this lecture and listen to what she had to say. The entire arena was filled with automobiles, some of them looking pristine, while some of them were broken down into individual parts. A magic circle appeared in the center of the arena. Rivet ascended from it. Immediately, the crowd surged in applause. Only a mystic master could teleport so casually. Her oil and grime-stained face only made her look more trustworthy in the matters of metal and machinery. Then, she gestured for her students to come forward. The gaggle of young magic students rushed towards one of the disassembled automobiles. This is called the chassis. The students began to discuss towards the crowd about everything the automobile was made out of. They explained complicated jargon so simple that a child could understand them. As expected, these students were geniuses. No one simple could become a mystic master student. And with their insight, the fantastical and complicated machinery of the automobile became easily understood. But not many were satisfied with that. Although this was formally called as a seminar, people expected to see something much more interesting. They didn't want to listen to a lecture so early in the day. Is an automobile really safe? Can you recreate it? What is its secret? Mystic Master. Surely you can tell everybody here that someone with good magic can make automobiles obsolete. That last sentence was very controversial, especially among the followers of the Guild of Arcana. Although fantastical, automobiles were exactly the opposite. They didn't use any kind of magic to operate. And if automobiles were to become ubiquitous around the world, then this would surely lower the power and influence of magicians. After all, they were still heavily relied upon if someone wanted to transport something heavy or do something a human couldn't do. With the age of automobiles coming, they'd lose that. Yeah, tell us. Show the importance of magic. People began to riot. They expected a seminar from the great Rivet of steel. But she just remained at her seat and let her students do all the work. Finally, she stood up. A smile was formed on her face. Then, she snapped her fingers. A new magic circle, one that was a quarter of the size of the entire arena, appeared on the floor. Earth magic flourished. The air in the Colosseum turned stormy. Everybody held their breaths as they felt something huge coming from the magic circle. Then it came. A rectangular head made of pure metal ascended from the magic circle. Chapter 11:01 Mighty Golem. Chapter 11:01 Mighty Golem. A mighty, mystical golem made out of pure metal emerged out of the giant magic circle. It looked like a blocky snowman, with beefy arms and legs, and a stalactite for its nose. Everyone held their breaths. This construct emanated a kind of strength that could threaten even a magnetic in and of itself. Everyone was surprised that Rivet would manifest this kind of monster in the middle of her lecture. Then, with a simple wave of Rivet's hand, the golem moved. She was instructing it with an action. And that action, as it turned out, was to raise its leg and crush the automobile right in front of its body. The automobile, despite being made out of Damascus steel, was easily turned into a flattened pancake, with glass shards flying out everywhere. Everyone gasped. Then silence. Some were horrified that such an expensive item was so easily crushed, while some were extremely happy. Ha 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 ha. See that, everyone? The automobile cannot go against the superiority of magic. As expected of the mystic master, she truly knows how to create a powerful metal construct. That automobile was like an ant. Hopefully, this will crush everyone's thoughts on buying more of this automobile. It can't replace good magic. With such a display, it truly did seem like Rivet was trying to display magic superiority. All around the arena, there were murmured discussions amongst the crowd, some having doubts about the automobiles as a whole. It seemed like the mystic master of steel was firmly in the anti-automobile faction. However, Rivet was doing exactly the opposite. She smiled, then finally stood up from her chair and faced everybody. Automobiles are the future, she declared. This sent a wave of confused looks from her audience. Automobiles were the future? Then why was the car sitting in the arena, flattened into nothing against a metal construct? It seemed like she was saying one thing and doing another. Mystic Master, you're misleading the public. How could you say that? Automobiles are nothing but a fad. Magic is and always will be superior. Rivet crossed her arms. Yes, magic is so much more superior over automobiles such as this. The automobiles have limits while magic has none. But you must take into account that magic, by definition, is the transcendence of humanity from the normal. Meaning, those who are normal cannot use magic. Then, Rivet pointed towards the automobile. This automobile, it doesn't need anything like that. It's accessible to even those forsaken by magic. And that's what most of you are missing. Yes, magic is superior. But that superiority alienates the majority. You conglomerates and upper echelons have been living the good life for far too long that you've completely lost track of common sense. Automobiles are the future. And you're afraid of that. You're afraid that automobiles equalize the advantage you have over them. Your so-called superior magic will not be needed anymore. You can't lord it over them. And by then, the world will experience an upheaval that changes the very structure of our society. Rivet boldly stared at the patriarchs and CEOs in the crowd. He recognized them to be from the upper echelons and conglomerates who had been expecting her to disparage the automobiles. But despite her words, there were still some who didn't want to believe in the future she depicted. That might be true, Mystic Master. But as you've demonstrated for us, in a matter of superiority, magic will still prevail. No matter how much automobiles are used in the world, it cannot defeat proficient use of the mystic arts. One only had to see the flattened remnants of the automobile to see that. And it was at this point that Rivet smiled. Are you sure about that? She asked the crowd. I ask those who are proficient in magic to step forward and inspect my construct up close and personal. Some people felt an ominous foreboding from Rivet's words, but they simply couldn't get a clue why. So, to satiate their curiosity, they personally stepped into the arena just as Rivet asked. About 20 people came forward, each coming from a variety of backgrounds. Some were representatives of companies, some from the adventurers, some from the beast folks, and some from those who were simply curious about the golem and the automobile. Rivet students guided these testers to come forward as Rivet commanded her golem construct to kneel. The 20 volunteers surrounded the golem. Seeing it up front, they couldn't help but praise the mystic master of metal for her amazing craftsmanship. The metalwork was so good that they couldn't even sense magic coming from the construct. Wait! The first person to notice something strange immediately touched the golem's shoulder. And as he did, his eyes widened with pure shock and horror. He backed away, tripping on his own foot as he did so. His face was pallid. It's as if he'd seen a ghost. Seeing such an adverse reaction, the other volunteers became wary. But still, they carefully moved forward and made contact with the golem. They used a little bit of their own mana to inspect the golem. Too much, and they'd experience a backlash from Rivet's large mana pool. But the moment they made contact, nothing happened. Weirded out by this, they began to inject more and more mana into the golem. But even when they almost filled the golem with mana, they still couldn't sense Rivet's overpowering mana inside. Was she that good at hiding her own power, or was this golem? It was at this moment when they realized the truth. Just like the first guy, they stepped back in shock. This golem, it's not being powered by mana. Rivet couldn't hold back her mirth. Ha 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 ha. Care to tell our audience about what you found out? But the volunteers were far too shocked to say anything. So, Rivet took it upon herself to finally reveal the secret. This golem is not powered by mana. It's purely a mechanical structure, powered by none other than the engine that's powering the automobiles. The engine. Chapter 1102 The Engine. Chapter 1102 The Engine. This revelation created a wave of disbelief within the audience. Most of them got up out of their seats saying things like, "That's impossible," or "There's no way," and a lot of variations of the same thing. No one could believe that the golem was actually not a golem at all. It was basically an automobile. Everyone had been accustomed to golems being creatures of magic. They were the quintessential products of wizards, since most of them were made out of the 4 basic elements. And now, after figuring out that the golem in front of them wasn't actually powered by magic, it completely upended their whole understanding of magic and physics. If it's not powered by magic, then how could it move? How could it raise its legs like that of a human? How could it crush the automobile under its feet with such ease? They couldn't believe it. If the golem was powered by this engine, then did that mean that the automobile had that kind of power and they didn't even know it? Rivet swung her hand, and the engine from one of the disassembled automobiles flew towards her side. This engine is a marvel of ingenuity. No one truly yet understands the potential of this item, except for its inventor, of course. Even I have only begun to understand the implications of such an efficient energy converter. A magic circle manifested in her hands. Then, more metal parts emerged out of her inventory. And using telekinesis, she began to create an entirely new structure made out of metal. It's a dog. It looked like a Frankenstein type of dog full of patchwork metal in its body and skin. Then, she connected some type of wire from the dog into the engine, which had been transformed into an electric generator, in order to emulate life into the dog. The metal dog immediately raised its head expectantly at Rivet. She took a thin metal bar and waved it in front of the dog, which caused it to jump around with excitement. And when she threw the rod, the dog immediately lunged and caught it in its mouth, the way that an actual dog would do. Of course, this dog is not actually alive. It is simply following the set of instructions I have implanted into its very essence. Rivet continued to make metal animals, all of which sprung into life as soon as they connected to the live engine. It was a testament to Rivet's skill and ingenuity that she was able to create such a product even though she'd only known about the engine for less than a month. She wasn't called the Mystic Master of Metal for no reason. Her understanding with metallurgy was second to none. The possibilities of this engine are endless. It is not an exaggeration to say that it will be the foundation of everything in the future. You'll see these engines power everything in your household. Your heat, your water, even your light source. As Rivet began to paint a picture within the audience, the general public couldn't help but be excited. It was a future wherein they wouldn't have to save up their money to hire a fire wizard in the winter, so they wouldn't have to freeze to death. It was a future where they'd finally experience a hot bath without burning wood. It was a very bright future in which everything that was out of reach for them was now at the tips of their hands. And in complete contrast, the conglomerates and the upper echelons couldn't help but squirm in their seats, uncomfortable at that future. It sounded like this engine could do a lot of things they had offered to the public for a lot of money, meaning that they'd stand to lose money because of this. It was very clear to them that whoever controlled these engines would end up controlling the world. And who owned the automobiles? It was none other than the Reborn company. Some very smart and practical people immediately made an internal choice. They absolutely cannot antagonize the Reborn company. If they held the future in their hands, then it would be stupid if they were to try and attack them. Some people, out of pure desperation, knew that if they didn't want to see a future in which they'd be under the control of these automobiles, they would need to produce their own engines in order to compete. And to do that, they'd need to figure out how to construct it all on their own. Which, if they weren't a mystic master of metal, would probably take years or even decades. "I'm saying this now," said Rivet. "If you're planning on trying to replicate an engine, then you're in for a hard and tough road. You'll probably be able to create one if you work on it long enough. But if you want to mass-produce them, well, you're in tough luck. Even I haven't figured out how to do that yet." And with those words, she signaled at her students to once again start the lecture. This is called the engine, and it's what allows the automobile to. While her students tried their best to demystify the engine to the general public, Rivet decided to reward herself with a job well done. It looked like she had successfully installed fear into those conglomerates and upper echelons, while also planting an idea into the general public. Now, it would be easier for them to trust Michael's inventions in the future. She then took out the phone from her pockets and began to fiddle with it. I'm aching for some 2-piece fried chicken and some ice cream," she said to herself. "Hey you!" Her shout interrupted her students, who were busy doing the lecture. "What do you want to order? Come on, I'm hungry." It wasn't just her students who were confused. Even the audience, who was seeing everything unfold in front of them, were completely befuddled about what was happening. Chapter 1103 Order Delivery. Chapter 1103 Order Delivery. Whatever. I'll just order each of you 2 pieces of chicken. And maybe an ice cream cone each," Rivet said, completely ignoring the looks she gathered. "Oh, wait. There's a new item that can be purchased. Fries, soda, and beer. I wonder what those are. But whatever. I'll order them too." Nothing could stop Rivet's good mood. Not even the awkward silence around the arena as she acted all weird and awkward. "Master, what are you doing?" asked one of her students. "This was not part of our plan. We have their attention. They are starting to warm up to the engines." The last few minutes were awesome. Rivet cemented herself as a true mystic master of metal with her jaw-dropping demonstration of engines, automobiles, and golems. However, as soon as that was over, she completely did a 180 and made herself look weird in front of her audience. She was talking about ordering some food even though they were so far away from any kind of restaurant. Rivet nodded. "And you're doing a good job. But I'm hungry right now, so I want to order some food." "We'll fetch you food after this lecture, master," said her student. "There are plenty of 5-star restaurants willing to accommodate us at their restaurants." Her student had a point. In those 5-star restaurants, they'll eat the most exotic food in the world, served like king and queens, and be in their own private room. However, this wasn't in the least bit appetizing for Rivet. "I don't want that. I'm jonesing for some McTony's fried chicken." Her students stared at their master, unable to understand her whims. They'd heard about this fabled McTony's fried chicken last night. She couldn't shut up about it. But from what they'd heard, this restaurant was located smack dab in the middle of the feast on the other side of New Sparta. "Master, that's so far away. You can't abandon the lecture." She stared back at them. "Who says that I'll leave?" And with that, she clicked the option on her phone that said, "Deliver." "I can't wait to eat my food." With a swing of her hand, an entire table and set of chairs ascended from a magic circle. Then, she sat on the end of the table, getting herself ready to munch on her favorite food. Everyone, thank you for watching our lecture today," Rivet announced, her voice booming to hundreds of thousands of people in the Coliseum. "Right now, we'll be having our lunch. You should too. So how about we meet here later on after everyone has had their fill?" Her students gave her a look of disbelief. Was she really doing this right now? Was she really stopping the lecture just so that she could eat her food? Food that wasn't even here? "What are you all doing? Sit down," she commanded her students. But they just couldn't get behind their master. No matter how eccentric she was before, She was never this indecipherable. What was she trying to do? What was she going to eat out here in the middle of the arena? This train of thought was mirrored by the audience watching them from the stands. They didn't know what to do, so they just discussed amongst themselves. What is the Mystic Master doing? She just talked about the engine, but now she's not going to talk about it? I know Mystic Masters follow their own pace and rhythm, but isn't this too much? What is she even doing there at the table? Just then, someone began to approach the arena. It was a demi-human, a satyr, wearing a weird golden-yellow attire that made him look like a butler. The word, Reborn Eats, was etched right in front of the satyr's uniform. He was currently carrying a rectangular backpack, one that bore the same symbol and color scheme as his uniform. Hello. Delivery for Miss Rivet? The satyr asked as he stepped on the elevated arena. Rivet's eyes widened with glee. Yes, that's me. Is that our order? The satyry delivery rider nodded and kneeled, taking out the rectangular box strapped to his back. Here's your order, the satyr said, as he unloaded the McToney's takeout boxes on Rivet's makeshift dinner table. Lord Michael has waived the fee for this order, Miss Rivet. He wishes you a great meal. Thank you and order again from our restaurant. You only need one click. And with those words, the satyr delivery rider disappeared into the tunnels down the Colosseum. Oh, how nice, Rivet said as she began to open the takeout boxes for everyone to see. Immediately, steam escaped out of the box, followed by that unique scent of spice coming from Dragon's whiskers inside the fried chicken. Master, what is this? Of course, as wizard students themselves, these young men and women had enhanced senses, which meant they were more affected by the unique spice coming from the fried chicken. Ha 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 ha, I know you're curious. Come on, take a bite, she said to her students. It didn't take them much convincing. After all, with the fried chicken presented to them at the table, they couldn't help but get hungry as well. And with the first bite, they couldn't help but gasp out loud. Their reactions mirrored that of Rivet's first time eating McToney's. Good right. They couldn't even answer. They were too busy eating chicken off the bones. It wasn't long before they finished their first meal. And as much as they wanted to refute their master, they too were hungry for more. They were addicted. That's not all. Try this ice cream, she said, giving them each a cone. They began giggling to themselves with how much of a wonderful experience this was. I'll try this soda too, said Rivet. Oh, that's very fizzy. Ha ha ha. That's an interesting feeling. The Mystic Master and her students began enjoying their lunch, completely forgetting that they were in the middle of a lecture just a few minutes ago. Chapter 1104 Takeout. Chapter 1104 Takeout. While Rivet and her students were completely indulging themselves in a variety of McToney's fried chicken, the hundreds of thousands of people sitting in the Colosseum were at a loss for words. They're really eating their food here? How was that even possible? Was it food that they prepared long ago? However, there were some people who noticed the emblem on the takeout boxes. McToney's, wait, isn't that the restaurant in the feast? Huh? I've never heard of that. I only got acquainted with them recently. They're the reason why there's such a large line in the first circle of the feast. The traffic in the center of the feast had become the topic of conversation for most. But the true cause for that hadn't yet been known. They knew that it was because of a restaurant, but they didn't know which one. I can attest to that. We were in line from morning till noon. And all I can say is that McToney's fried chicken is damn well worth it. We're actually planning on lining up on the queue later today so that we could order more. Not a lot of people can eat there because the line is so long. I'm actually surprised that Mystic Master Rivet was able to get one herself. Because of such discussions and rumors, people finally knew the name of the food Rivet was eating. McToney's. Still, people were confused. It was highly irregular for restaurants to give food away so far away from their restaurants. If there were, then it was small, bite-sized snacks like skewers and other candies. But those fried chicken were full meals. They weren't meant to be eaten outside of the restaurant. In fact, most companies design their food to be eaten inside. It would force their customers to stay in their location, therefore be much more likely to buy more food. They're giving drinks too? People noticed Rivet and her students sipping some kind of liquid from strange-looking cups. And after confirming that they were indeed drinks, people couldn't help but scratch their heads. What kind of company would give away their own cups like that? Not only that, but each of those fried chickens came with its own utensil. It was a major loss for the company to offer such amenities to their customers. And after confirming that they were indeed drinks, people couldn't help but scratch their heads. What kind of company would give away their own cups like that? Not only that, but each of those fried chickens came with its own utensil. It was a major loss for the company to offer such amenities to their customers. They simply didn't know if the Reborn company was unaware of such bad business, or they didn't care. The Reborn company is making some weird choices. It matters not. They're doing us a favor. They're strangely doing well in the feast. But as long as they cannot solve the innate problem in their location, then they can never catch up to us. It was surprising for these upper echelons and conglomerates to see the Reborn company suddenly jump up to the 45th rank from day 2 despite having 0 tokens in the first day. But it was no cause for concern. They basically disregarded the Reborn company in the feast by now. However, what they could not ignore was their automobiles. Just as Rivet had demonstrated them, automobiles were going to be a major part of the future whether they liked it or not. And so they needed to plan. They needed to make sure that they still had a place in the world even if that happened. The conglomerates and the upper echelons gathered at a non-distinct room in the Colosseum. Ladies and gentlemen, I think it is time for us to discuss something important. The one leading the charge was an upper echelon patriarch of the Zentmeister company in the 24th rank of the golden ranking. The automobiles pose a threat to our current livelihoods. It will be dangerous in the wrong hands. Nobody could deny that. They all went silent. They all saw the giant golem from Rivet. If an engine could power such a gigantic killing machine, then the balance of the world will go off of its kilter. If normal people got a hold of such technology, who knew what they would do? We're already busy dealing with petty thieves and bandits here and there. What do you think will happen once they have golems under their command? That was true. Engines could become weapons of mass destruction that could be purchased for the mere price of a few million gold coins. Local warlords will have a field day once they figured that out. And once that happened, it would be bad business for everyone, local citizens and socialites together. So here is what I propose, said the Zentmeister patriarch. We ask the owner of Reborn for a number. One of the upper echelon companies raised their heads. You want to buy the Reborn company? The Zentmeister man nodded. Yes, if not their entire company, then the automobiles and all of their components. And before the others could complain, the man added, no matter the number we end up on, we will all shoulder the burden. Everyone will contribute an equal amount of money. That way, everyone owns a part of the Reborn company. No majorities. It would be too unfair if only the conglomerates bought the Reborn company. But if everyone bought a piece of Reborn, then it would be like nobody owned it in the first place. It would be equal. That way, they could control the distribution of automobiles and engines. Some people in the room laughed at this proposal. What makes you so sure Reborn will sell? Everyone turned their heads to see who spoke. They were all surprised to see that it was a blonde-haired man sitting with the conglomerates. It was Joseph Vanderbilt. Come on, Joseph. You of all people know that everyone has a price. And if we're all going to offer our own money, then we could basically buy anything in the world. Joseph chuckled to himself. That's if you think the owner of Reborn is only in this for the money. Who isn't? Zentmeister replied. Lions, that's who. Joseph whispered to himself. You and no one else will go with this proposal. Don't even bother the Reborn company. If you do, then you'll have to answer to me. Chapter 1105 Orders Galore. Chapter 1105 Orders Galore. Are you sure this is wise, Joseph? The Reborn company is still far too green to handle such an important product. Joseph sneered. What you're really trying to say is that the automobile will be much better in your hands. The Zentmeister patriarch nodded. It will be better in our hands. That's simply a fact. With the combined powers of all the conglomerates and the upper echelons, we'll be able to much better control and propagate the use of automobiles and engines. Not to mention the research. Imagine the kind of constructs we could create. And yes, I know, this will be far too unfair for the Reborn company. But this is for the best. No offense, but I do not trust any of us here to not be greedy and take the automobile for themselves. I'm sure they'll want to swallow the Reborn company for themselves. What I'm offering is a peaceful solution before the problem even begins. The other companies began nodding their heads. They do not want their fellow upper echelons to take over the Reborn company for themselves. So, they would be tempted to take the Reborn before the others could get to it, which would create a chain reaction that starts a full-out war with everyone. So, the Zentmeister patriarch was actually giving a much more peaceful solution. Joseph cleared his throat. You're going by the assumption that the Reborn company can't defend themselves. Everyone looked at him with confusion. Of course they couldn't. They're just a lower echelon company. They didn't even have a nascent spirit cultivator to protect themselves. May I remind you the reason why we have this feast in the first place? We're all fighting to get the remaining corpse of the TriStar company, which if you can remember, was caused by the Reborn company you are all trying to underestimate. They all turned silent. Zentmeister crossed his arms. Yes, it is perplexing that they won against the TriStar company. Whether they did that with any help or not is still up for debate. But let's say that they did it all on their own. That still doesn't change the fact that they can't survive a war against more upper echelons. What if 2 or 3 of us team up? Joseph stood up. If their enemies can have allies, then so could they. The Zentmeister Patriarch shook his head. They're still way in over their heads. They're too hasty to become an upper echelon when they don't have yet the capacity to do so. Case in point, the feast. They could have taken this time to consolidate their advantage in the technology and transportation sectors of the market. But instead, they've dived head first into the food market just to compete with us. A lot of people agreed with the Zentmeister Patriarch. They all saw the results of the first day. 0 tokens. That basically closed off their chances in ever reaching the top 10 of the feast. They'd have to be earning millions every single day just to get to the top 20. And they're almost a third of the way through the entire week. But Joseph disagreed. He could see much better than these bitter old fools. I suggest you all worry about the feast for now. If you lose your focus, you may just find yourselves on the losing side of history. And with a smile, Joseph nudged his head towards the giant magical screen on the wall, showing the current situation in the Colosseum. It showed the Mystic Master still munching on the chicken she ordered from the Reborn company. But then, they all noticed something. Everyone was currently looking at a certain section in the audience. It was the section of the beast folks. Specifically, the area where the werewolves resided. A certain tribe within that area were currently having a jolly good time, talking and conversing with each other while eating a vibrant, red fried chicken in their hands. That's the brown blood tribe. Where did they get their food? Each and every single one of those werewolves had that distinct cardboard box marked with the symbol for McTony's on their laps. Not only that, but they had cups and those strange cones as well. It was the very same thing that the Mystic Master had gotten. Tell me what happened, the Zentmeister Patriarch commanded. And a second later, a figure blurred behind him as his own guard reported the situation. Meanwhile, back in the Colosseum, the rest of the hundreds of thousands of spectators were as befuddled as the leaders of the upper echelons. After all, just a few minutes earlier, an entire army of those strangely attired demi-human satyrs carrying the symbol of the McTony's restaurant appeared in the Colosseum, each one carrying a box on their backs. Just like with Rivet, these delivery riders dropped off the food into their respective customers before disappearing out just as fast as they appeared. And that wasn't even the only instance that this happened. On the other side of the beastfolk section, a large portion of the elves were also visited by these self-proclaimed delivery riders to give them their McTony's chicken orders. It wasn't just Rivet and her students. There were now thousands upon thousands of people eating McTony's chicken at the same time, even though the supposed restaurant was so far away from the Colosseum. After seeing this, people couldn't help but speculate. Was there some way that these people were able to order food? Thankfully, it was very easy to find out what happened. After all, the delivery riders themselves were advertising what they were doing. They left posters behind their orders, which showed a very visual graphic that caught everyone's eyes. McTony's fried chicken, now available anywhere you are. Just input your order into your phone and we'll take care of the rest. The Zentmeister Patriarch stared at the poster with his own 2 eyes. And he couldn't help but shout out loud. What the hell is a phone? Chapter 1106 Advent of Phones. Chapter 1106 Advent of Phones. It's a metal brick? The Zentmeister Patriarch shouted out loud. Right now, they were only going off of visual inspection. But they knew that that was what Rivet and the beast folks were using to get those delivery riders to give them McTony's chicken. And after a few more investigations, it was quickly apparent where they got this phone from. The brown blood werewolves, Lady Farron and the elves, the Mystic Master of Metal. Every single one of them were connected to the Reborn company. They still weren't sure, but the fact that the phone could order from McTony's restaurant practically confirmed it. Immediately, whispers and murmurs broke out within these group of upper echelon leaders as they instructed their spies to figure out more about this supposed phone. After all, this was another unique technology that the Reborn company was responsible for. If the automobile, the engine, and everything else was an indication of anything, then this phone must be another game-changing item that they must pay attention to. Crunch. While everyone was busy giving out instructions, a lone crispy crunch took everyone's attention. They all turned their attention to the corner of the room. There, a single woman sat at her own table, munching on a red fried chicken in her hands. And even with this attention solely focused on her, the woman ignored them and reached down for the tall cup near her feet, before sipping on the straw. Everyone would have scowled at her for such rude behavior. Who invited this uncouth woman into their meeting? But then they recognized her face. It was none other than the infamous Duchess Regina, monarch of Metropolis. Aya! That hits the spot, the Duchess said. Oh, I wasn't bothering all of you, right? It was only now that everyone noticed what she was eating. It was the very same chicken that was causing a ruckus down at the Colosseum. Where did you get that? The Zentmeister Patriarch asked. His nose perked at the scent emanating off of the chicken. I ordered this myself, Regina replied. What are you all looking at? I'm not giving you any. How? The Zentmeister Patriarch clarified. How? The Duchess repeated. It's through my phone, of course. She waved a metal brick right front of all these upper echelon leaders. They noticed a strange glow coming from a small section of the phone, which was strangely moving like a magical painting. But everyone noticed that the phone didn't use any kind of magic at all. It was the same with the automobile. This phone, it's magical, really. With it, I can take a picture of everyone's shocked faces for me to cherish for a very long time. Can speak to other phones. And now, I can use it to order McTony's chicken from the comfort of my own home. It has become inseparable to my own life. And I suspect that it will be for everyone else too in the near future. The Zentmeister patriarch furrowed his brows. If what you're saying is true, then the McTony's restaurant can deliver food to its customers anywhere they want? The Duchess smiled. Yes, I can only imagine what will happen in the feast because of this. It didn't take long for these upper echelon companies to understand what she was implying. The reason why they were so confident that the Reborn company would fail in the feast was because they had been placed in the worst spot possible. With their secluded restaurant, they'd struggle to even get 10,000 tokens in a single day. And to get to the top 10, they'd need 1 million. However, if Duchess Regina was telling the truth, then this basically negated their need for space. They didn't even need a restaurant at that point. The entirety of New Sparta would be their restaurant. Why are you telling us this? Duchess Regina smiled. Because I want to help the Reborn company. You're doing the exact opposite by telling us this information, replied the Zentmeister patriarch. Is it? Regina asked with a smile. Because, whether you like it or not, you'll be future customers of the phone, just like with the automobiles. So now I'm giving you all a choice. Go with the flow of water or get drowned by it. Just like with the automobile, Duchess Regina was trying to separate everyone into 2 factions. Those who recognize Reborn's potential, and those who want to destroy it. Because of this, Zentmeister's original proposal was once again brought up. If they bought the Reborn company as a whole, they won't have to worry about anything. But before everyone could even deliberate upon themselves, Joseph immediately took this chance to remind everyone of something important. May I remind you that everyone must play fair. You cannot use undue power against a weaker opponent. If you do, then it's not just the Montgomerys that you have to answer to. You'll find trouble with the Vanderbilts too. And just like that, the idea was shut down. Even though the majority of the upper echelons were on board with the proposal, just one word from Joseph immediately cut off anything they wanted to do. That was just how powerful the Vanderbilt name was. Joseph knew that they weren't actually afraid of him. They were afraid of his father, the original lion. And even if he had to use his father to protect Michael and the Reborn company, then he would do so without question. Of course, he wasn't that naive. He knew that this wouldn't completely stop those who wanted to see the downfall of the Reborn company. They would just have to be sneaky about it. And that was fine. The main purpose Joseph had in this was to prevent the whole force of the upper echelons coming together to force the Reborn company into a decision. That wasn't fair. At least now, they would only have to deal with 1 or 2 companies at a time. Even though the odds will still be stacked against them at that point, they still had a chance. Michael had a penchant for always surpassing expectations, after all. Hello everyone, this is Shadow. Due to copyright restrictions on YouTube, I can't publish many of the audiobooks you love. That's why I've created a special paid service where you can enjoy over 300 high-quality audiobooks from platforms like Webnovel, Pocket FM, Audible, Wuxia, and more. Each novel comes as a one-time purchase, no subscriptions, no hidden fees. After payment, you'll receive full access via Telegram, along with all future updates for that novel. You'll find a wide selection of your favorite genres and titles, always in premium audio quality. Check the full list of available novels in the description. DM me now to get your favorite stories in audiobook form and start listening today.